Thanks so much for coming out to the Austin Mobile and Web Game Developers Meetup. We're excited to have a couple of awesome people showing off their stuff tonight. This is sort of the first of a slightly different format for these events. We've had some where it was like a round table, like question and answer thing. We've had some where it was like one person giving a presentation for the entire time. And this is one where we're going to sort of try shorter talks by maybe a few different people in sort of a slightly more low-key way. Instead of having like a super prepared presentation, they're sort of just going to share some stuff they've been working on. Although the two people who are talking tonight both have really awesome stuff, so it ended up not being that low-key after all. But that's kind of the format that we're going for with these, and we'll definitely have more in the future. So if any of you guys are interested in showing off stuff that you're working on at one of our future like show and tell type events, we'll have one of those maybe once every few months. Just talk to me and we can get you set up to talk. So it can just be something really rough. It could be like a 5-minute little thing that's just like, hey, this is this thing I'm working on, and we just want to share it, get people's feedback, whatever. It doesn't have to be super polished. That's kind of what we're going for with these. So anyway, I guess I wanted to also thank our sponsor. We have Autodesk sponsoring us again this month. There's no one from Autodesk here. but they were here back in January. They spoke briefly about Maya LT, which is their new 3D animation package that's geared specifically towards indie games and mobile games and stuff like that. So it's intended to be a lot cheaper than full-blown Maya and still do a bunch of the cool stuff you need to do. So I guess check that out if you're interested. Also, usually at the beginnings, I give everybody a chance to stand up if they have any projects that they're working on, if they're looking for someone to collaborate with them on, or if they're looking to hire someone for a position related to game dev, or anything like that. So I guess if any of you guys have something to share in that regard, now would be the time to, yeah.
Sure. Hi, I'm Gary Wagner with Warp 10 Games, and I'm producing a tower defense game, and I'm looking for 3D artists, specifically environment artists, and potentially a Unity developer as well.
Cool. Anyone else? Yeah.
There's Kevin Brown representing a group called Drumleaf. They've got an MMO running in a browser today. We want to bring it to iOS. We're looking for a tech lead, preferably somebody with a good network background.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah.
Hey guys, my name's JD Weinstein. I'm an associate here at Capital Factory, help with screening the incubator program. We got a couple hundred applications a month. We choose about 5 companies each month. So if you're a company and you're interested in it, come talk to me. We have info sessions every Tuesday at 4:30 too. So.
Cool. Yeah.
Hey guys, I'm Caitlin with Phoenix staff and currently hiring C++ game devs as well as some people on the infrastructure side and project management. So if you are interested, please let me know.
Cool. Anyone else? Great. Well, actually, I have something that I'm looking for, which is I haven't made any announcement of my own in this area yet, but the company that I'm working for, we are going to be developing a mobile game that's for kids ages 9 to 11. And it's going to ideally be iOS and Android. It's not like a super high budget thing, but we're looking for maybe a single person or a small team of like 2 to 3 people who would be interested in doing contract development work to build it, and design it and do art. Or if you are someone who is a lone wolf and you kind of know other people you can collaborate with on it, then definitely chat with me afterwards. And yeah, we're just trying to get an idea of some different people who might be interested. So I guess without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Troy Gilbert. He is with Mach 10 Studios here in town, and he's going to be talking about a couple of games, one that has already been released and another one that's sort of a work in progress, and Yeah, so take it away.
Thanks. So hey, yes, my name is Troy Gilbert. I've been making games for a while now. I guess I've been in the game industry for 12 years, and but have been pretending at making games since I was a little kid on the Commodore 64. It's yeah, a lot of kids you know, play with Legos or whatever, and I certainly did that. But I played at making games. I didn't necessarily successfully make a lot of games, but I played at making games. A lot of that on the Commodore 64 of typing in basic listings and making things that look like games. And interestingly, my career kind of took me along the path of playing at making games for a very long time. I got out of college as kind of my expertise was in computer graphics, and joined up with a company here in Austin selling middleware to other people who made games. So I spent 5 or 6 years helping other people make games. And even though that gave me the opportunity to see the inside of hundreds of video games across the world, it was only a few weeks at a time. And so the company I worked for was then acquired by EA, and for a brief second I thought I was actually going to make games, and then I joined their technology group and their CTO group, and again helped people make games for a while. And then from there left EA to come back to Austin and did a startup. And the startup was making a web app to help people make games. This startup, Mockingbird, when I started that, we ran that for about 4 years. It didn't break even ever in 4 years, and so eventually we had to stop. But it was a lot of fun thinking about kind of the meta of making games. And so and in particular, our product was how to making games fun. So making a game out of making games. And we've seen a lot more of that in the last 5 or 10 years. But when we were doing that, there was a lot more convincing that still had to be done. You know, this was before YouTube was a household word, before Facebook had launched. So it was earlier in the massive sharing and making days on the internet. When I started that startup, we were looking to make games in the browser because we knew that's where it had to be if we were going to get any kind of mass adoption of people making games. And that brought me back to a good friend of mine in the technology world, Flash. So a long time ago in college, I had worked closely with Flash 3 at the time. They're now up to 14, but at the time it was Flash version 3, and we were working to kind of open source it and build a reference Flash player. And while none of those efforts ever panned out, obviously, everyone still uses the same closed source Flash player. I did learn Flash from kind of a different perspective than a lot of people learned Flash. A lot of people came to it through kind of the art tools of building animations and interactive web widgets and all that kind of stuff. But I was implementing the Flash player, so I came at it at kind of a low level. At this time, Flash didn't have a programming language built into it. It was all kind of what you could almost call visual scripting, but it was not even that involved. But with the open source Flash player we were building, we were actually programming the Flash player by plugins and various other kind of things we were toying with. So when I came back to, I guess this was in 2007, to do my startup and wanted to build games in the browser, Flash was the natural choice. And they had just done some pretty fantastic things with Flash, including introducing ActionScript 3, which is kind of a Java-esque version of the language for programming Flash. close relative to JavaScript. And they also introduced basically a set of tools targeted toward programmers as opposed to targeted toward artists. So at that point, we had a proper tool chain for building anything from scratch for the Flash player, so we could treat it like an actual platform. So I spent 4 years basically learning to do kind of cutting edge Flash stuff. And during that 4 years, Flash had a bit of a rise and then a bit of a crash, as it famously didn't work on the iPhone, and there was a lot of backlash due to how it chewed up battery and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of game developers moved away from Flash if they could. I then joined up with Zynga here in Austin, and that was fairly short-lived, but it was quite a roller coaster for the year and a half. The Zyngas of the world really kind of reintroduced Flash and made it mainstream as far as able to support revenue. It showed a lot of people that there was money to be made in building browser applications or games running in the browser. But the writing was also on the wall during that time period that mobile games were equally as profitable in the free-to-play space. And fortunately, Adobe was actually listening and paying attention to the games industry for once, and they moved the Flash toolset onto mobile, specifically what they call Adobe Air. And that has been kind of a game changer for the Flash community, or people who know the Flash toolset. Now with the tech available from Adobe and the freely available tech as well, you can target the Flash platform, but what you end up with is native binaries on iOS and Android, as well as desktop applications, as well as browser applications that can run across Mac, Windows, and Linux. So you can really hit, outside of consoles, you can hit all of the platforms where people are playing games. And that's pretty powerful, particularly for the indie game community, where having to port to different technology stacks on different platforms can be very cost prohibitive. I really got into mobile Flash when I started working on a game that eventually became Puzzles by Thumb. The goal, I was sole developer on it, and the goal was to create a mobile game to kind of capture the super casual, draw something free-to-play market. It was, it was a game being designed for people who didn't play games obviously I play games and have a lot of game industry expertise, but my boss, the man who was funding the project, had never made games before, didn't really play games, but he was interested in the space as kind of a business opportunity. So we started building Puzzles by Thumb, and at first we were building it in Objective-C, natively on iOS. And then we started discussing, the port to Android, and we realized that the Objective-C codebase was not going to do us any good porting to Android. So we reconsidered our options, and we considered things like Unity, but Unity was going to set us back, $5 or $10 grand to lock in all the licenses at that time. It's a little bit cheaper now if you're willing to put up with splash screens, but it can be pretty expensive to dive in and upfront. It can totally be worth it. And plus, I didn't have any experience with Unity, so I wasn't interested in reinventing the wheel there. So I dove into looking at Adobe's technology stack again, and was blown away by the performance it offered. and how nice it was. It was really kind of a pleasure to work with. We built the game, Puzzles by Thumb, and had it running instantly, within the first week, and then spent basically a year creating about 6 different versions of the game, trying different designs. Obviously, the kind of lightweightness of something like Flash was really what made that possible. So this is a little bit about the game that we ended up building. These are the instructions, so to speak, the screenshots out of the App Store. It was a very basic game of puzzle pieces revealing on the screen, and then you buzz in when you think you know what it is. You choose from the multiple choices. The faster you do it, the more stars you earn. The more stars you earn, you advance through the levels, and there's also a leaderboard competing with your friends. The game hasn't been financially successful. We've had about 5,000 installs, which is not enough to do anything for a free-to-play game. We need about 100 times that to make it a worthwhile venture. We've also spent $0 on marketing, which is a huge part of it. During the year that we were iterating on the game design, it became more and more painfully obvious that the free-to-play titles, the majority of these successful free-to-play titles, required significant investments in marketing to effectively get the ball rolling. And that's before you even know whether the game will make money if you get all those eyeballs on it. So we, at this point, have put this game on the back burner. It's still available. I recommend everyone go out and check it out. It is no longer free to play. It is as just an experiment because we weren't making any money free to play. We made it a $2 game, but there's no in-app purchases anymore. So for that audience that just wants to buy their games and then not be bothered with advertising or any kind of other free-to-play aspects, that's the way the game works now. And it's made about the same amount of money, for better or worse. But at least now I can have arguments on the internet from a more principled stand. Right? So I wanted to focus more talking today about the technology. So I've been talking about Flash. I know the most popular tech for doing kind of cross-platform stuff these days in the game community definitely seems to be Unity. And obviously, if you're doing anything 3D, I would say go with Unity. But we weren't doing anything 3D. As you can see, it's a very 2D game. And going with Unity felt like a little bit of overkill to move these shapes around. Flash, it's a pretty satisfying setup. On the client side, we've got what Adobe calls Air, which is their runtime for Flash. And then there's some very, very broadly used tech that everyone effectively uses that sits on top of it called Starling, which is kind of a 3D accelerated library for doing 2D stuff. On top of that, there's Feathers, which is a kind of a UI toolkit, and those combined gives you a really powerful, really rapid tool set for developing mobile apps as well as desktop apps. Additionally, Adobe Air can be extended with native extensions, which are basically stuff you write in Objective-C or Java, and allows you to get at the kind of vendor-specific libraries on iOS or Android or the desktop. There's a guy who runs a company called Milkman Games that has created a lot of these native extensions. They're not free, but they're 40 or 50 bucks a pop, and they're worth every penny because they're supported and very well documented, and very good APIs. We use several of them for in-app purchases and things like that. Just as kind of an unrelated point, the server side of Puzzles by Thumb, we ended up running on Google App Engine and Amazon S3, and all of that, the game is still running. Even when it had its most activity, which was only on the scale of hundreds of active users, we stayed well within the free tiers of both of those services. So those were good decisions as opposed to getting like well, you could probably spend $5 on a rented machine and still handle all that no problem. But a lot of options out there today for rapidly building games. Like I said, Puzzles by Thumb was all built by me. And I'm not some super genius programmer. I'm actually an incredibly slow programmer, as you can tell. It took a year and a half, but able to do it because of what Flash is offering me. The gentleman I work for is kind of a serial entrepreneur. He made his millions in the .com world back in the 90s, back in the original .com world. And now he just kind of spins off startups when he has an idea for a startup. That's where Puzzles by Thumb came from. He had a very vague idea for a game and thought it would be interesting to develop a game. And I was lucky enough to cross his path and get that job. But we've now moved on to a different startup that has absolutely nothing to do with games or anything like that. Not running on ActionScript, JavaScript web app, very kind of traditional startup kind of thing. And we'll spend the next couple of months kind of working on that. But deep down, well, not even that deep down, I'm a game guy. I'm a game design guy. I like building games and have always worked in the game industry. So to scratch that itch, I've picked up an old project that I've prototyped a while back called Knighted. And this is a game that I'm working on, again running in the Flash player and on Adobe Air, that is built around the Knight's Tour problem, chess problem, which is basically getting a knight chess piece from point A to point B using the L-shaped moves of the knight on the board. It can be not tricky because there's always a correct answer on a small enough board within a couple of moves. So it's a matter of kind of speed and then how quickly you can move the knight around on the board. And it's kind of an interesting mechanic. It's kind of very simple to describe. Standing up here, it's more entertaining to actually play on the phone. So after all the presentations, anyone's welcome to come up and check it out on my phone and see how it plays. I'd love to get any feedback you guys may have. Yeah, so I'm going to cut it over to questions because I'm not going to drill down into really techie specifics unless you guys want me to. Not sure what anyone's interested in. So, any questions?
You said you were involved with Mockingbird?
Yes, I founded Mockingbird. Yes.
The wireframe?
No.
Okay.
No. They came after us. We were They about 3 years after we founded Mockingbird, they came out with their wireframing tool, and it caused some confusion initially, just in some search results stuff. But it wasn't too big of a deal. There wasn't a lot of overlap. At first we were worried there was some overlap depending on how interactive their wireframes were going to be. But as you can look at them now, that it's not any real overlap between the products. Our games were kind of DIY arcade games kind of thing. So
Okay.
not too serious, but yeah, they were GoMockingbird.com and we were PlayMockingbird.com. So.
Now I know why, and I can sleep tonight.
I work in Air and Flash as well, and it kind of oscillates between some degree of pleasure and extreme pain.
Yes, yes.
What percentage of, how do you divide your pleasure and pain?
Yeah, no, that's a tough one. As someone who spent a long time, I mean, the first 5 or 10 years of my professional career programming in C++, I've got no fears of diving into Objective-C or any of the kind of low-level platform libraries. I mean, that's what I did all my graphics engineering in for the longest time. So there are definitely times where I realize that I know more what I want to get done at a lower level than I'm able to do through kind of the levels of abstraction. And that certainly is frustrating. Fortunately, my love is for 2D games that don't demand a whole lot of the underlying platform. So I, to a large degree, design around those limitations. Percentage-wise, I wouldn't say it's half the time that it frustrates me, but it certainly varies. There'll be long stretches where, very, very happy with it. But then definitely when it comes to integrating, for example, doing in-app, or actually Facebook integration was the biggest example, is that there's some good native extensions that do almost everything you want it to do, but then the problem is you're like using an extension to an abstraction, and it's like if you wanted to do just this other thing, you get in this spot where the Facebook SDK, Facebook's dumped all these resources into making it really nice, but you're using kind of like a wrapper around it that's not necessarily as nice. And so that was probably the most frustrating part, where those few hooks were touching the OS-specific stuff. I could imagine if I was doing a slightly more performance-intensive game, or if I was trying to do any 3D stuff, I would probably bump into it a lot more frustration-wise.
Well, first off, it's nice to hear like a talk on Flash, and that's not Flash sucks. I was wondering, like, if you could describe specifically the porting process, and do you have two, like, yeah, I guess what's that like if it's you just have one code base and.
Yeah. So for Puzzles by Thumb, it runs on iOS and Android, and it would effectively run in the web browser, but we've not built like a landscape version of the UI, so that would need to be happening. But between iOS and Android, it is the same code base. It's basically, I mean, to get specific, in Flash Builder, it's a single project with both targets inside of it. For Knighted is a similar arrangement, but it also has a second web project that refers to the code base. So basically, I mean, to think of it in general terms, kind of the boot up sequence for like a mobile versus a browser game is a little bit different, mainly just to like polish the experience. So in a web-based environment, there's kind of more of a loading screen kind of infrastructure that's not there on the mobile side.
So you did Puzzles by Thumb in Flash, and now you're doing an unrelated non-game JavaScript app.
Yeah.
So I'm a full-time JavaScript app developer, but I haven't done a whole lot of Flash. I'm curious, would you, now looking at a lot of the options that are available in JavaScript for targeting different platforms?
Sure.
Have you done any experiments to see if that might be an option next time, or is Flash just that good right now?
It's tough. They're getting closer and closer. So depending on the app, I would, and I have a few game ideas that I'm toying with doing in JavaScript, because if the game could benefit more from just running in a browser and not requiring an install or anything like that, basically, if I want someone to be able to tap a link on their mobile device and go to a web page and see something, then I would seriously consider JavaScript. If I'm planning on trying to get someone to download it and install it, so if it's going to be bundled as a native app, right now I'm still leaning more toward Flash for that. There's just a lot more because it is actually getting compiled down to native code and it's just kind of more mature. It's not constrained by running inside of a browser, so to speak. It's still the direction I'm going, but I do like JavaScript. As a JavaScript developer, you'd probably like ActionScript. ActionScript is technically ECMAScript 4, and JavaScript is ECMAScript 3 or 2 right now, and they're transitioning to ECMAScript 6. ECMA is the European standards body that controls it, like ANSI. So ActionScript 3 came after ActionScript 2, and ActionScript 2 and JavaScript are essentially the same language. And so the whole kind of prototypal inheritance and all that kind of stuff that JavaScript has is you can take most JavaScript code and compile it in ActionScript. I mean, other than some like application framing things, it's virtually swappable. So I enjoy both of them. I like JavaScript a lot for a lot of things, and am liking it more every day, particularly in constrained environments where you know which browser you're targeting, things like that. So yeah, our current project is JavaScript server to client, so it's Node.js on the back end and
Awesome.
JavaScript on the front end.
What are you doing with Google App Engine? How do you find it? I mean, what end user features are just kind of administrative stuff?
Yeah, so Google App Engine, pretty thrilled with it. We didn't exactly tax it, but we wanted something that would kind of scale, automatically. And so we basically needed a managed platform for that because we only have me on the team, and I didn't want to be on, server duty 24 hours a day. So we needed something that was automatically scaling. And so I took up Python, and this was the first time I'd done Python since 6 years ago, and so for me it was like starting from scratch. But it was easy enough to get everything we needed going. We used a Google App Engine for syncing between devices in Puzzles by Thumb, as well as some kind of Facebook and friend leaderboard kind of utility stuff. Originally, or at one point in Puzzles by Thumb's design iterations, there was a much more involved server that did a lot more kind of analytical kind of crossing of data of different play sessions and stuff like that. There was a lot more live data, and so the back end was much bigger at one point. We eventually kind of collapsed a lot of those design cases down to a folder of several thousand static files on S3, but it actually captures all of the use cases that we needed. Given that, we went from a dynamic server to a static one. That obviously the static one can scale, Amazon S3 scale, so there's plenty for any game.
So for Puzzles by Thumb, you said originally it was free to play. How long was it free to play for?
It's free to play for 3 or 4 weeks. Like I said, we decided during that time that we weren't going to do any marketing spend. And so after the first 2 weeks, it basically fell off of all of the charts. And once it fell off the charts, it was just like a dozen or so installs a day. And I have no idea how people find it. I guess searching happened to stumble across it via search. But I think, if we had really pushed on the marketing, we maybe could have held it steady at several thousand installs a day, but that still wouldn't have been enough to recoup the costs put into it. It may have been enough to sustain it, but not enough to recoup the costs.
Did you have to create a new app just to put it up with being paid after that?
No. You can change the price tiers for an app.
Sure.
I posted it.
You go from free to.
Yeah. I posted a new version. I mean, it had to be an update to the app, but it was an update that removed all the in-app purchases and then changed the price tier. Yeah.
So you said you guys didn't do too much marketing, and I kind of know Apple controls, the store, and once you kind of fall off the list, it's kind of tough to get exposure. I always wondered, why haven't people gone the approach of, through Google? Like, a lot of people search for terms and then build a landing page to funnel through users to a landing page for a mobile game and have that link to the App Store.
Oh, they do. Yeah, they do a ton of that.
Did you guys take an approach like that at all, or
No, because effectively you need to in the current App Store to make basically paying for installs effectively, however, on whatever scale, to like very cheap installs off of a web browser to very expensive installs coming out of another game or something. Paying for installs, you need to be making, $1.50 a user on average before like paying for those installs makes sense, because you're going to pay as much as $1 to get if the user sees like a video ad in a game and clicks through and installs, that might end up costing you $1. Yeah, and so that's fine if on average you're going to get like Candy Crush might get like $6.50, or something like that out of an average user, and it's actually like 1,000 users that don't pay anything, and then one user that pays, $60 or $70 over their lifetime. And so, we were looking at it, and we were getting at, we were trending toward at best like 7 or 8 cents a user, which means unless we thought we were going to be really lucky on the marketing spend, and it would really kind of like a viral thing. And it didn't feel that way. From the users we did have, it didn't feel, they weren't really doing any of the viral components of the game. Even though, the play sessions were long and healthy and all that kind of stuff. So we kind of reached the conclusion that it's a fun game, but it doesn't kind of pull people toward it. So they enjoy it if you put it in front of them and they play it. So it's a tough one.
So for Air and a couple other tools that you're using, like kind of on top of that and everything, does that suite sort of lend itself easily to like a test-driven development or unit test scenario, or was that still like managed?
Yeah.
Like an Xcode or something after?
Right. Well, I don't do any test-driven development or unit testing or anything like that. I know that makes me a bad engineer, but it makes me a better artist. And fortunately, I use a platform that's high enough level that I don't have to worry about memory leaks in the same kind of way, stuff like that. But there is certainly a very strong community of Flash developers that do practice pretty rigorous test-driven development and everything. The main IDE that people use for Flash and Air is Flash Builder from Adobe. There's also Flash Develop if you're on Windows, which is a really good one. You can obviously do it all text files and command line as well, just like anything else. Flash Builder is an Eclipse derivative, so all of those kind of test-driven tools that you have in the Eclipse and Java world, all those are available and people use them. It's not my personal style, so I don't know much of the detail space, but I have a few good friends who are kind of die-hard test-driven developers, and they work doing kind of like enterprise-scale apps in Flash.
Just a quick question. So the last game that I produced had a Flash front end, and we released it for PC and web, and then we were in the process of porting it over to mobile using Air. But then we heard a rumor that Adobe was no longer supporting Air. Yeah. So we got squashed on that. Is that true?
No, it's everything I've seen. I've certainly heard the same things at different times. But everything I see is that it's not going anywhere. They just in the last week or so have released a new beta version of the Flash player and the Adobe Air runtime. They've been on schedule with releases every 2 or 3 months for the last couple of years. Well, 3 or 4 months, every 3 or 4 months for the last couple of years. So they've been steady, and I've seen them putting a lot more time and effort and money behind Adobe Air for Games over the last couple of years than over the 10 years prior to that.
So it's just a vicious rumor.
Yeah, it's a lot of it is often kind of misconstrued remarks that they make. They're very poor at communication. They don't have a very active developer relations group in the games industry. It's fairly new. They have a couple of standout people, but they kind of ebbs and flows how good they are at making contact with developers, and so they'll often like talk about like something will get blown up as Adobe's dropping support for Flash on Android. Well, they are, but that's the in-browser Flash plugin, not the Flash toolchain, which compiles down the native code for the platform.
So it's probably right there.
That's where a lot of it comes from. When people hear that you're making games in Flash for the iPhone, they're like, well, Flash doesn't work on the iPhone. It's like, well, it's not actually literally Flash on the iPhone. It turns into regular code, and it's cross-compiled. Magic of cross-compiling. Everything.
Yeah, one kind of related like question, like how do they make their money? The toolchain is free and everything. Like
they make their money off of selling the tools, Photoshop, and specifically related to ActionScript, Flash Builder, which you can't imagine they make very much money off of that because it's not terribly expensive. But in general, it's kind of just the pull them into the larger suite kind of thing. And now that they do like the subscription pricing, I think it's even more of kind of like an icing on the top. Kind of, it's a little bit extra they can throw in there to make it look like a bigger suite.
Yeah, I think the idea is if they give the developer, if they make the developer tools free or very cheap, that will drive demand for the creative suites.
Yeah, which are very expensive.
Photoshop makes like some crazy percent of their revenue comes from just Photoshop.
Yeah, yes, it's like 70 or 80%. Yes,
And they open sourced a part of their tool chain, or they open source?
Yes, so there's a part of their tool chain. Well, their whole tool chain is open source.
Okay.
There's it's now, it used to be called Adobe Flex, and it's now been handed over to the Apache Foundation. So there's Apache Flex. The compilers and everything for Flash are, there's an open source version and then a closed source version. I'm not sure on the distinctions. They're roughly parity, feature-wise and capability-wise. And the compilers are all open source. They're written in Java on the, all just like all the languages these days, on top of that.
Any other questions, I guess? Well, actually, what's awesome is the next person who's speaking, I guess, is also talking about Flash. So maybe this is an interesting introduction / segue into what John Watson is going to talk about. So if you want to give us a minute to switch over the cables and all that stuff, and then we'll start with water. Okay.
Good stuff.
That was awesome.
It's pretty heterogeneous stack. So
Yeah.
I don't think
Right.
They would have put
Here,
so it's a little bit higher, so I don't have to pay.
The other benefit would be is that in the indie game development community, there's a lot of Unity expertise. So sometimes that's a little frustrating because kind of the crowd out there is largely talking about Unity.
So we're up here.
Kind of new and exciting in Flash. So I mean, it's like. I can also plan to go to console. Unity has options to console. Flash is right now. very kind of.
Yeah, it was
Playing the game.
You would have some options for going to consoles and such, but it's really required.
How far will this reach?
Basically, special relationships with the OB.
Yeah, I'm gonna go this way.
So you really have to have like a team
Yeah.
It's kind of like independent.
It's definitely,
I don't. It's actually it's a customer facing.
Yeah, it does that.
Yeah, well, I mean, hit me up on Twitter to, is it like that blue? Find me on Twitter, the bio links back something like Troy Gilbert. Get hold of me, Troy Gilbert at Gmail.
Maybe.
Oh, thank you very much.
Maybe it's only just taking up the number of pixels.
Right.
This is 24.
Yeah, so it's like that
Could be a Dropbox app to the output. Fairly big keynote.
So when you're making like a runner, like is it a runner kind of like a temple run?
I'm a UX designer.
It's a, no, I want to stay away from I did about 6 months there. Personally, I thought support engineering.
What's your name?
I'm Jim Martin. You were, I guess, cameras on the side.
Yeah, and then he found his life. So he hired me on our college, right? Sorry, you talk about the camera. So I didn't spend much time in office. I spent
all together.
yeah, I was in sales.
That sounds a lot better.
I find the community is very
There's lots of progress.
It's like like actual
So in theory, you should run people are depending on
Okay, so I guess we're going to go ahead and get started with our second half here. So very excited to have John Watson from Stoic Studio here to talk about, I guess, some similar themes and whatnot as far as the tech side of things, but especially talking about their game Banner Saga and porting it to mobile. So yeah, take it away.
Yeah, this is going to dovetail nicely with what you were talking about, I think. I'll go into some more details about how we built it. Before I get started, though, I want to tell everybody what the Banner Saga is. It's a story-driven role-playing game, turn-based strategy combat. It takes place in this bleak Viking world in the midst of the Viking apocalypse. It's all hand-animated, painted. It's done in the style of old Disney movies from the 50s. We released it a few months ago on PC and Mac on Steam. And now we're in the process of porting it to a bunch of different platforms. iOS and Android are up, and we have console ports underway as well. So what I'm going to talk about, all right, good. What I'm going to talk about tonight is the process of building it, the technology we used, and how we're going about porting it to mobile. All right. So as I mentioned, the Banner Saga is on 2 platforms now, both desktop. It's on a bunch of different stores. Steam is the main one. We're on Humble and GameFly, GameStop, GOG, and things like that. Steam is the driving force behind all PC games. Mac accounts for about 10% of our sales. The team was put together. Stoic was put together by 3 of us: myself, Arnie, and Alex. Each of us taking different roles. You know, I'm the programmer, and we have artist and writer. And over the last few years, we've employed lots of help. One of our helpers is in this room. We outsourced music through Austin Wintry, audio from a group in Australia called Kapow, and contracted for animation work here in town with a group called Powerhouse. So, as I mentioned, all the animations are hand animated. They're done in Flash, so they're done on a computer, but it's done by hand, frame by frame. So all the characters fighting in the game are us acting it out in front of the camera, and then every frame is drawn over, and you get a nice fluid style, kind of a retro style from that. That's hard to get just doing it from scratch. But downside is it's very time consuming and difficult to do. I was responsible for most of the engineering and certainly running it. And the game is implemented largely in ActionScript, deployed with Adobe Air, the desktop platforms. It's got some C++ components that are for integration with third-party libraries. And about a year, the first year of our development, at the end of the first year of our development, we released a multiplayer demo called Factions, which is on Steam. It's a free game. And that runs on a Java backend on Heroku and various Amazon miscellaneous services. So it's about a 2-year development cycle. I've been working on the technology for about 2.5 years almost. All right, so the core game engine is in pure ActionScript, and it's developed in Flash Builder. Mostly on Mac, but I go back and forth between the 2 because we have to support both platforms. There were several choices. There were several reasons for this choice. At the time, Unity would have possibly been was actually a candidate. I did a prototype in Unity to see how it was going. There's several things that made us go this route. One of them is that the way our game is structured is so driven around these hand-drawn animations, which are altered in Flash, putting them in the game without sprite sheeting them was a bonus, at least for the first part of development. by the end of development, they're all sprite sheeted, so it doesn't matter. Also, the game systems are all required custom tool development. So one of our goals as a studio was for me to make the content development as smooth as possible by creating tools for everything. So we have custom dialogue trees and layered scene editors and these battle boards. So I was having to write all these tools anyway, and they're not tools that Unity provides. They would be custom no matter what language I chose. Whole game is 2D. There's no 3D elements in it. And one of the things, somebody asked about unit tests. One of the things that I liked about it was that I could do everything with a whole suite of unit tests. And Unity was thwarting my efforts to do so because it had so many globals. Now, that being said, the first year was great. I've really had great success doing test-driven development, and I definitely advocate for it as a way to go faster, basically. However, after a year of building up this beautiful test suite, when I upgraded to the next version of Flash Builder, all their stupid tools broke all my tests, and I wasted about 2 days trying to get them back up and running until I finally said, screw it, I can't waste any more time with this. They were nice while I had them. Forge ahead. So the size of the game in terms of lines of code is about 250,000 lines of code, which is a lot for a small team like this anyway. It's augmented with a whole giant pile of assets. We have about 2.5 gigabytes. A lot of it is textures, bitmaps, so these huge scenes that are designed. They were designed from the beginning of the development to work on Retina displays. But imagine a Retina display of an iPad is 2048 across, but we take that same resolution and make it CinemaScope, which is 2.35 by 1, which is like the style of these old movies, like the David Lean movies and some of the Disney movies. So it's 2731 by 1536. So large textures and layered on top of each other many times, which presented some interesting performance problems. We load all our assets using a Flash URL loader. So we have a resource manager, and this gives us some flexibility because the resource manager allows us to track what's being used, release things that are not being used, reference counted. Like we handle the reference counting for these things. This is the URL loader where we can use whatever protocols this thing supports. HTTP if we want to load our assets from a CDN, which we did at first, or file protocol, which is what we use in general because we package all the assets with the game. This is another reason why we liked ActionScript and Flash for this, because this was pretty easy for this. And at the beginning, we thought, when we were designing the project, we thought maybe we would release it on the web, like on Congregate or something. We wanted to maintain this ability to be on the web, on the PC, on Mac, and ultimately on mobile. So I just mentioned that. All right, another huge component of the game is the user interfaces, the graphical user interfaces, which I'll call GUIs. Some of you may disagree with that terminology, but I call them GUIs. And those are all developed in the Flash tool, in Flash Pro. And in a similar way, these things are all developed externally to the game engine, and then they're loaded at runtime using the URL loader in the same way that the other assets are. As far as the loading goes anyway, once they're loaded, you have to instantiate the movie clips and do the magic. Right now there's about 43 FLAs, total of about 230 megabytes worth, and that's the FLAs. So when they compile down to Swifts, it's probably about half that size. So it's a pretty good bit of texture, memory, and even those GUIs. All right, this is all built on Adobe Air. Adobe Air, as a lot of you know, I've already been talked about, allows you to take this bytecode that you've generated from Flash and from Flash Builder and package it up into a native executable for the various platforms that are supported, in our case, PC and Mac. And another component are the ANEs. The ANE stands for Air Native Extension. It's native code that you can call from Flash. We use two currently. We use a third-party sound library called fmod, and we have a wrapper for fmod, and also for Steamworks, for all the Steamworks integration, achievements, stats, users, that kind of stuff. About 4,000 lines of C++ code, so it's relatively small amount of C++ code for the compared to the ActionScript. Okay, so now we want to use Adobe in the same way to port to iOS and Android. So there's some challenges and limitations when you're going from desktop to mobile using Gary. First one has to do with the runtime GUI loading. So we currently load them into the game using the URL loader, and then we use some mechanisms inside Flash to take those bytes we loaded and create an in-memory representation of the SWIFT. You can query it for the various objects that exist in the Flash library by getting class definitions from the library. And then once you have the definition, you can instantiate it, put it on your display list and show it. So it works really well. You can load the GUIs when you need them, put them on the screen, unload them when you're done. However, due to an Apple policy, Adobe has implemented load bytes in such a way that it fails if any ActionScript bytecode is found in the loaded data. Unfortunately, when you use the Flash library to export symbols, to export movie clips, that creates a stub class for each of those symbols, which is ActionScript bytecode. And this triggers the failure of the loader. I consider this a bug because the loader can't distinguish between what is actual functional bytecode and generated boilerplate with absolutely no functionality. So it's somewhat frustrating. So there's a couple options for dealing with this. Adobe provides one. It's for stripping, to strip the heavyweight assets out of your SWIFTs and separate it from the code in your SWIFT, and then you can link the code directly with your game and load the assets at runtime. Satisfies my requirements in theory. Some of the problems with this is that the tool, this functionality is only supported using the command line ADT tool, which is mentioned in the yellow box, the Air Developer tool. So you can write scripts, shell scripts or Ant scripts, whatever, to do it. But it's not integrated with Flash Builder. So if you want to integrate it into your daily workflow, you got to do some Ant scripting and try to use the custom build rules in Flash Builder without triggering any of its bugs. Another issue is that the stripped SWIFT files, which is where the code lives, are actually not really SWIFT files. They're invalid SWIFTs. So you can load them in this one particular way, but they're not, you can't utilize them in any other way that you normally utilize SWIFT. So that's kind of going down a new path that I'm a little leery to go down that path and find out new surprises. I'm kind of reluctant to give myself any additional exposure to the Adobe toolchains because I've spent a lot of time on this project working around issues that are basically some kind of bugs inside their black box that you just have to fiddle with until you get it working. Like the documentation's not there, the support's not there. I eventually got it all working, but it was a huge pain in the ass, and I don't really want to add yet another layer to that. This is the Adobe documentation picture for it. You can kind of see. Let's see. You can see over here. This thing is. Yeah, here we go. You have these 4 SWIFTs, and you're stripping 2 of them, and you're just linking in with your code directly, and 2 of them you have just the code and then the assets. You kind of get the idea how the thing works. So that was an option. Alternatives. I was thinking, I don't want to use this tool, so what am I going to do? So basically, I can just, instead of compiling SWIFTs out of Flash, I can compile SWICs, which is, I assume it stands for Shockwave Component, SWC, but it's basically, instead of a SWIF, which would be kind of an executable movie clip that has an entry point and it does things, a SWIC is more of a, it's like a class library. It's a collection. It's basically your library from the Flash file. All a SWIC really is a zip file with a SWIF in it and an XML file. So, but they're useful because you can take a SWIC and link it statically at compile time with your game engine and the entry point that you're providing. So this is pretty straightforward. You just link it in there. All the classes and all your exported library symbols are just available. They're just available to your code. You can construct them and put them wherever you need them to go. Problem is, it's pretty big. It kind of sucks loading all my data for the GUIs up front. 100 megabytes isn't much compared to my total footprint for data, but 100 megabytes will slow down the initial startup of the game, so I'd like to avoid that if possible. So the things that go into a SWIF file that take up the space are vectors, which are the line drawings and the curves and the, I guess I'll include tweens with that. Code, any code that you happen to write in there, the code is auto-generated. Both of those are pretty small. Fonts can be somewhat heavyweight, but the big culprit in all of our SWIFts are bitmaps, huge. As I mentioned, the screen size that we're targeting is 2731 by 1536. So it sounds like an odd resolution, but we do letterboxing as well, so it works on a lot of different resolutions. All right. So one of the things Flash gives you access to is a size report, so you can analyze what's taking up all the space in your SWIFts. Unfortunately, this is really small, but the point of this is you get a listing of all the things that your SWIF is composed of. Your fonts, in this case, the fonts are about 700K, which isn't small. This stuff, this yellow stuff, is the actual ActionScript bytecode that is confusing the loader and preventing us from doing runtime GUI loading. If you can see it, it really is just the empty class definitions of those library symbols. And finally, the bitmaps are where it gets really interesting, and we see that there's a 2.6 megabyte bitmap hanging out in there. This is something we want to get out of our build. So to mitigate this, we could go check out the bitmap on the Flash stage in the timeline. And one thing about the bitmap is it's not easily addressable from ActionScript. So what we can do is wrap it in a movie clip by creating a symbol. And once it's wrapped in a movie clip, we can give it a name, which helps. But the key thing about the name is we can use it as metadata. The Flash doesn't give you, as far as I know, any free-form metadata on your objects. You can't just define key value pairs, although that'd be incredibly useful. But you have a name field, so you can encode your path, your bitmap, and jam it in the name field and get around that. So you could probably, I don't know what the limitation for size on the names are, but you could probably encode a bunch of script. You could pack a bunch of script stuff in there too if you want to. But you'd have to, of course, parse it. Now, at runtime, we can get that stuff out and use it. So one other thing you got to do, though, is the layer in your timeline that contains this bitmap, if you set it as a guide, then it won't export it in the SWIF. So that guide is only for use in the tool. So it stays in your FLA. You can see it in context with your other stuff, but it won't go out to the SWIC into the SWIF. So now we load up the thing, and we parse the movie clips that we create, looking for these encoded names, and insert the bitmaps where they're needed by loading them through our URL loader. All right. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about how the GUI is implemented. One of the key things I wanted to do was I wanted to use a programming tool like Flash Builder to create all this reusable logic and components, but take advantage of the power of the Flash tool as layout and artist tool and actually setting all this stuff up. So essentially we write all the GUI logic and the behavior in ActionScript, and then we link it into the Flash Swifts somehow. And the way we do that is we extend classes that live in the engine. We extend those in Flash. So this part, the game engine part, compiles out a library SWIC, which the Flash tool can import essentially and gain awareness of the classes that are defined in there. So we can put all our logic down here, we can unit test it, whatever we need to do, and then this can just say, I am an instance of the inventory GUI that you've created here. And as long as the thing you created in Flash satisfies all the requirements of the implementation, you should be good to go. The way this works is when you're defining your symbol properties for your exported symbol. In this case, it's a heraldry page. It's called Assets Saga Heraldry. You can tell it what base class to use. By default, this always says movie clip. If you just create something, it's a movie clip. You create a symbol, it's a movie clip. But anything that derives from movie clip can be used here. So in our case, I know it's hard to read because it's small, but this is a GUI Saga Heraldry class which extends movie clip and it provides all the functionality. So now, when we create this, it's going to be of that type, and it'll inherit all of that behavior at runtime. So, yeah. Downside is this breaks the iOS loader because you now have an empty class definition that does nothing, absolutely nothing, except to say it's of this type. All right. Let's see how this all of this hooks together. When we take these components, we take the GUI logic, the GUI layout, Flash animations, and put it into the application. So in this case, we've created the GUI, the Swifts, generated the SWICs basically via publish process. And then the main entry point, which we write, that's compatible with AIR or whatever, it's maybe an entry point for a web application or an AIR application, it links in all the SWICs, game engine stuff, the GUI logic, and you have all the classes you need to run the game. So to go through it in order, we first compile the GUI logic that has certain requirements. It needs to have a text field of this name and a button of this name and a placeholder movie clip of this name where we're going to stick our character portrait and so on. And then in Flash itself, you implement something that fulfills these requirements. It has all the pieces that are needed by the code. You publish the SWICs, which when in this publish process, it refers back to the GUI logic through this library SWIC that was created. So it knows what's going on inside your engine. And finally, you take your main, and you compile everything together. You can run into problems doing this because all of these things were compiled with knowledge of classes that exist here. So where, in what components here were these classes defined? Our class, for instance, our example class is like this Saga Heraldry base class, the engine class. So is the engine class, does it live in this library SWIC? Is there a definition of it there? Is there a definition of it in this SWIC? Is there yet another definition of it in this exported SWIF? If there are multiples, is that a problem? Is it just a bloat? Is it just wasting space? Or is it possible that you compiled this 8 weeks ago and it has an out-of-date definition for this class that used to live here, and now you have conflicting definitions? Which one gets loaded first? Which one are you dealing with? it's a bad situation, and it causes a lot of headaches, and it causes errors that are really difficult to diagnose. One of the things you can do to avoid this is ensure that your linkage from the Flash SWIF to the library SWIF is external. And that is not the default. The default is to merge all the imported libraries into code, which will lead to the problem that we saw before. There's a picture of the dialog here, again, very small. But in the ActionScript settings, here's the panel where you import all your SWICs. And you set the link type to external. This is the default merged into code. Something to be aware of. And you get the same effect. There's also a source path. You can also point Flash Pro to your source path for your engine code. That'll lead to similar problems, because it'll end up compiling the code it sees into your GUI SWIC. Okay, so now how does the ActionScript logic that we've written in the engine actually get connected to the Flash layouts when we load them at runtime? Well, as I mentioned, we're extending an engine class. We have the two pieces. The exported library, I'm calling it, giving it the name Y here, so we have a name for it, contains various stuff. It's got a display list in it for each movie clip. It's got a bunch of movie clips and text fields that we can address. Got a bunch of other stuff, shapes and animations that you typically don't address. I don't anyway. They certainly can't have names, although they are on the display list. So as we've seen, our Flash exported, our Flash object is exported from the library, extends some engine class, which is called X here. You've seen this dialog before. In this case, Y and X are the Saga heraldry GUIs, and the engine code is all built on the right side, and this, it satisfies the interfaces necessary, it initializes, it picks out all the little pieces, and attaches logic to them. And the way I do this is during initialization, I go through and find things by name, and then most likely assign them to member variables, and then have a bunch of code all over the place to make it do interesting things. I think I'll go over this a little bit. There's some weird things that can happen when dealing with member variables. If you have when you define named objects on your timeline, they can potentially be instance variables can be created for them for this class that's auto-generated. So if you have something, like if you have a little a button or something called A in your Flash, and you have this base class that also has a variable called A, what happens? Well, it depends on what you have set for there's a setting called automatically declare stage instances. If you allow it to declare these stage instances on the SWIF, you end up with a conflict. It yells at you and tells you that there's a conflict with an inherited definition and names as public. Okay, well, this I also consider a bug because it knows the thing is already there, it's compatible type. There is absolutely no reason for this class to declare this field when it already exists on the base. So you can choose to maybe make this private, and it'll shut up the error, but you end up with nasty runtime errors because when you address this at runtime, it is null, even though if you inspect it in the debugger, there is actually only one field with that name on that object. The only way to really get around this is to name your engine variable something totally different. I use a naming convention to do this, and then everything works nicely. All right, so that was kind of an overview of some of the some of the ways that the game is put together. So now I want to talk specifically about the challenges that arise when porting this desktop game to mobile. As I mentioned, we have to convert all the runtime loaded Swifts, so that's laborious. Extract all the giant bitmaps so that we don't have a huge entry point. Font duplication is an issue that may have to be addressed. It is kind of lame to have 40 copies of the same font in your program at the end, because each of the GUI swix has the fonts embedded. So either I need to figure out how to embed it once and have all those refer to the one embedded font, or just deal with it. It's the least of my problems at the moment, because that only amounts to a few megabytes. I have bigger problems than 10 to 20 megabytes. Asset size is one of them. The size limit for an IPA is 2 gigabytes, and our game is larger than that. So I'm going to have to look for some waste, maybe reduce the quality on some of the videos and some of the textures to make it fit. And I could always, you could make your IPA smaller and then download the additional data from a CDN or something after once they run the app. But then you kind of have this weird two-step install process that I think will annoy the user. Certainly would annoy me. We have some video in there in the game, and Flash Media video, the way I'm using it anyway, does not work on iOS, so I'm gonna have to find a solution for that. One of the things that the URL loader provides is various other protocols, like this app protocol. So this means pull, load this data from the store of assets for this application, whatever that is on your platform, whether it's Android or iOS. It works for desktop as well. So if you have a specific place, it knows internally where you're storing your data, and it gets it. I haven't used that much, so there may be some gotchas there. On the original desktop, we just use file at runtime. I compute the actual path on the machine to the data. There's also local file handling. We have to read and write things like save games and preferences. That's all done through some Adobe Air functionality that lets you access the file system directly instead of going through URL loaders. Scaling issues. The game is made to run a desktop, kind of standard size 1080 monitor. So you take something with more pixels than that and shrink it down to the size, and the pixel density leads things to look small, and buttons are too small to hit. So there's some scaling issues to deal with. A lot of these things, these are things we've hit so far. These are things that are, some of these are mostly done or in progress. Some of them are speculation. Touch-specific issues, some don't have hovers. Hit regions may not be right. We have a lot of debug tools in the engine. We use a lot of powerful functionality in a custom console and some sound debug consoles and all these other tools that we use. Would be nice if those were available for testing on the tablets, so I got to come up with ways of invoking those. Optimization is going to be an issue, I'm sure. The game, as I mentioned, there's not a lot of, sophisticated rendering going on, but there is a lot of layering of alpha. Many layers of giant textures with things animating in between them to break coherency. It actually runs quite well on this new iPad. It runs better on this new iPad than it runs on my 2.5-year-old Mac Mini. So that's good. I haven't gone backwards in time. I haven't gone back to this. The older ones are my phone to see how it does. So I'm sure there's going to be some pain there. We have to convert the A&Es. A&Es are currently C++ code that is compiled for Windows and Mac. So we need to make the same functionality exist on iOS and Android. There's a few other A&Es we want to integrate. Game Center one, like Milkman Games, and maybe Amazon Game Circle or something. So we have to do the platform-specific stuff that we're going to integrate with on Android and iOS. We'll keep the Fmod one for our sound. We won't need the Steam one, not in this format anyway. Another challenge is actually doing development testing with this because the game is so large. And if you were to compile the whole thing, say I were just to arbitrarily strip out 500 megabytes of assets and compile an IPA that fits, it's incredibly lengthy process. I don't know exactly how long it is. It's the type of thing where you get up and you go take a shower, or go for a walk, or go get lunch. It's not something you can actually do as part of your development process. So one of the cool things our URL loader let us do is we don't package the assets with the development debug builds. The assets are sitting on a local web server. So instead of loading them with a file URI, we load it across the LAN from a local Python web server, which you can run with the one command line. So that now the IPA build deploy to iPads cycle is fast. It's 15, 20 seconds. Okay, so another option we're looking at for porting is Scaleform. And this is something that's always been part of my plan for consoles. It's one of the reasons why all of our rendering is using pure Flash displayless stuff. It doesn't use any Starling. Starling is not supported in Scaleform, and we were able to get the performance we needed without it. So Scaleform, what Scaleform is, it's a clean room implementation of Flash runtime. And it's developed and distributed by Autodesk, which is appropriate, I suppose, for this evening. And it has, so you can basically take Flash bytecode, you can take a Swift, pretty much any Swift, and run it inside Scaleform like you would a Flash player, and it runs. It runs. In fact, the performance profile of Scaleform compared to Flash Player Air is different. Typically, rendering is incredibly fast in Scaleform, as opposed to being incredibly slow in Flash. On the other hand, Scaleform does not do any just-in-time compiling or anything with the bytecode, so it's straight at interpreting the bytecode. So the bytecode interpretation is slower in Scaleform. Fortunately, that's not my bottleneck. My bottleneck is rendering, so it should flip with Scaleform, so maybe it'll still be in spec or at least close to it. Scaleform has support for compiling native wrappers to a dozen different platforms: iOS, Android, all the consoles, handhelds, Linux, everything. So that's cool. So we're actually in the process of getting a Scaleform build going on Windows and then on console. And I'm going to continue with the Air packaging of the game. And hopefully we can compare the two side by side and pick the one that has better performance characteristics. So Scaleform. Scaleform has some limitations. It doesn't support any of the Adobe Air libraries. So Adobe Air is kind of an add-on library to Flash, and it doesn't support anything that you're using there. Fortunately, one of the ways we architected the engine was that 98% of the code is pure Flash code, and then anything that deals with Air is sitting behind an abstract interface, and all we have to do is replace implementation of that, and Air is out of there. So that's not too bad. We have to replace. We use that for things like file I/O for save games, preferences, checking The A&Es, since they are AR native extensions and there's no more error, have to be brought out and converted into C++ that's compatible, or whatever language you want to use, that's compatible with linking with Scaleform. There's a few challenges involved here. One of them is that Scaleform is not compatible with bytecode generated by the ActionScript compiler 2.0, which is unfortunate. ASC 2.0 has been out for almost 2 years, and I'm pretty firmly entrenched in using it, and I have to kind of fiddle around with my development environment to make it, to compile. I don't even know how to compile on ActionScript 1.0 anymore. I don't even know where you would get such a compiler. I know that if I were to compile the game from Flash CS 6, I think that's still using the ASC 1 compiler. So I could potentially figure out how to hoist my 250,000 lines of code into Flash Pro CS6 and hope it compiles without crashing. Or I can try to convince Autodesk to support ASC 3.0. It's not a total fail. I mean, if I build just a little toy app to test, just build something with a bouncing ball, export it using the 2.0 compiler, it works in Scaleform. It's not like it's totally incompatible, but ASC 2.0 does some things with the bytecode that confuse Scaleform. So far, Scaleform has been very responsive, and they've actually made, in the course of a couple of days after getting a complaint from me, made some changes and gave me a patched version. So that's a breath of fresh air. Dealing with Adobe for 2 years. Scaleform does not support the entire Flash feature set. So if you looked at the entire Flash API, I don't know what percentage it is, but it's a lot. It's 90% or more. And they have a nice spreadsheet that tells you what's not supported. A lot of the unsupported stuff is stuff you're not using anyway, like some really edge case filters and that new text format that Flash has, TLFT, whatever it's called. There's some stuff that I'm not using anyway. I'm sure I'm using some of their unsupported features, but it's not like it's riddled with it. Got to do native porting, so I've got to change all this code to be, instead of A&E specific, we've got to make it work with Scaleform. Benefits of Scaleform. Hopefully, the performance, as I mentioned before, it remains to be seen. But I've used Scaleform in the past. I didn't really mention my history, but I worked in AAA gaming for a long time, and Scaleform is very prevalent there. It's not used like I'm proposing to use it as a wrapper for an entire game. It's typically used to display the user interfaces inside a 3D game or any of the games. So like Star Wars The Old Republic, which I worked on for many years, all the user interfaces are Flash, and they're rendered in Scaleform. That's a typical usage of it. And I know from that experience, it was, at that time, just light years ahead of Flash in terms of performance, rendering performance. I like the benefit of having a cleaner development environment for writing native code instead of having to go through the A&E hoops and packaging it with that tool chain. I like the idea of just being able to write a freaking library and link it with the executable. There's far more supported devices. If it works on Scaleform, then I can put it on all these things, but via, if I can get the user interface working right. Nice thing is, I can get rid of my error dependencies. So if it works on Scaleform, I can deploy it to all my target platforms, and I can take error out of the picture entirely, even on desktop, everything. And of course, there's licensing fees associated with that. But simplifying my tools and my build process is worth a lot to me. That's all I have to talk about. I want to take some questions if anybody has them. These are the bullet points we went over. As I mentioned, since we are in the process of doing this, I have my hands full of lots of different things. I am looking for someone to hire on a short-term contract basis to do some of this AR work for me, like porting the A&Es to iOS, profiling it, just basically porting it, doing the porting work. So if anybody here has that kind of increase your expertise, I have a need. Anyway, any questions about any of this stuff?
So a big, considerable chunk of that was difficulties with going to iOS, and you said that was some of the issues with some of the policies. I'm assuming with something with having to be written native C or C, Objective-C or whatever.
It's not really about Objective-C per se. It's about loading executable code at runtime.
Oh, okay.
So basically, they don't want you to have a way to bypass the App Store. But like, if you could load executable code at runtime and potentially create your own competitor to the App Store and sell games through it, which is why I'm sure Flash was not allowed in the browser. I don't think it had anything to do with battery life. It's about protecting the App Store, which is understandable.
So that's why I guess I was going to ask if there was any type of similar issues with Android, but I guess that right there's answers. I
haven't done any the loading of bytecode. As far as I know, it's not an issue on Android. I am interested in having all my platforms work the same way. So if I'm going to go all this work to make these Swix compile time linked, I'm going to do it that way on every platform, if I can. In terms of the file size, I don't know if there's a file size limit for APKs. I don't know if anybody here knows that.
Does it have to be 50? Right? Is it?
Well, there's two limits.
There's original, yeah.
There's a 2 gig for
yeah.
the files that you can host.
Okay, so it's 2 gig as well. Yeah, there's a limit for the size. There's a size limit for downloading over the air, which is I think either 100 or 500 megs. 100 on iOS. But the total size limit is 2 gigabytes. So if you're on Wi-Fi, you can get a 2 gigabyte. And I just no way around that. I'm not gonna. I mean, our games are big. It's just big. I'm not gonna. We deliberately made all of the art to support Retina displays. That was a design decision from the 2 years ago when we started. So it's big. It just has to be.
I'm curious how many. When you said you had multiple layer, like how many full screen layer? Is it full screen layers or is it like?
Yeah, some of them are full screen, some of them are, I mean, they're definitely different sizes. There are a few full screen layers, and some scenes have more full screen layers than others. I mean, if I were to say the number of pixels being drawn on the screen is probably including the user interface sitting on top, it's a lot. It's 10 to 12, times per pixel. On average, probably. Like some of them are full screen and some of them are little pieces. It definitely varies. I don't have an actual number for you, but it's quite a bit. We typically have about 7 to 9 layers in the world, and they parallax with each other. And then you have animated things at different layers of that, like your caravan that I showed, and then the birds flying by. So you have those semi-static layers which are parallaxing, and then you have animated things that are sprite sheets moving around between them, breaking up the coherency, preventing it from keeping the composited layer in cache. But yeah, it's 10 dozen, and then you have UIs on top of that. So yeah, we did a lot of work to make sure we didn't have any just giant regions of pure alpha. That happened a lot at the beginning because we kind of, the way we approach it, I just sort of made these tools for the artists to build the world in and like just do it. Just whatever size texture you make. There were some of the textures before we optimized for release were 20,000 pixels wide, one bitmap. It's like a whole world. And it works. I mean, it doesn't crash. It's slow, but some of those scenes you go into, and you imagine looking at the scene, some grass here, and there's 2 trees on the other side, and it's all blank in the middle. That would be one texture, and it's all just alpha, And Flash is not fast at combining that, and nothing. I mean, they'll kill anything, even high-end graphics. Not one, but overdraw is one of the biggest killers.
Especially on the GPU.
Yeah. Yeah, that was overdraw was a problem for us.
So do you think that other people who have tried porting very complex games that were developed in Flash from PC to iOS have encountered similar issues? Or are there a lot of people out there even doing that? Like, are you guys just?
I don't know. I haven't encountered anybody that's done it. I mean, I've seen it go the opposite way. Like Kingdom Rush was originally a Flash game on web, and they went to mobile, and now they're on PC. I don't know if they used Air for that or not. I tried to contact them, but they didn't respond. And I've tried. I spend a fair bit of my time like going to forums and trying to engage with Adobe developers, but I have a lot of trouble finding help. And even for things like I mentioned earlier, just trying, I need to hire somebody for some work to do some A&Es. You just troll all over the place for this, and it's like crickets. So I don't know, man. I don't know how many games. I know that League of Legends uses Adobe Air, but I don't know to what extent. I don't know if it's the entire application or if it's just a.
There's got to be the UI first.
The UI.
It's just the lobby.
And then they launch in. So the lobby's there, and then they launch into a different app. So that's yeah. I mean, you can certainly do 3D stuff in Air using Starling. I haven't, but of course you don't have the tools that are available and things like you need to. You're kind of writing a graphics engine.
You mentioned, I didn't catch it, but the choice to not use Starling, it's just...
Actually, when I say to use Starling, I mean Starling is like a wrapper on top of 3D stuff. It kind of gives you, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sort of gives you an interface like you're using a display list.
Yeah, on top of Stage 3D.
Yeah. Now, if you can use Stage 3 directly and write your own graphics engine.
But the scale form doesn't support Stage 3D, right?
Right. It does not support Stage 3D, which is and I was using the word Starling and Stage 3D interchangeably earlier, which is a mistake, but they don't support Stage 3D, and I knew this from the beginning. I asked them about it 2 years ago when we set out this project, and they said, like, why would we do that? I'm like, all right, and I'm not going to use it as. But what were you, I think I interrupted.
Yeah, well, that was, you answered it.
Okay.
What informed the choice not to use Starling?
That was it. It was basically to keep the door to scale form open. If I had gone down the route of, and I was using Starling was on the table up until a few months, before launch. If my optimization efforts had not gone anywhere using the traditional display list, I would have gone to Starling. I mean, that's, if the game weren't performing well enough and we were 5 months from launch, I would have gone to Starling. And I'll deal with the fallout from scale form later.
So you assumed tablet and touch right from the beginning? You didn't have to redo the battlefields and the arenas?
We designed it from the beginning on tablet and touch. All of our UIs, we considered button size, being able to use it without hover. What if hover's not present? What if you just have a finger? What if you don't have a right mouse button? What if you don't have a keyboard?
So pathing, complex pathing in the battle.
You click in the different.
Is it just about touch and release or something like that?
Yeah, you touch and set waypoints. You touch your guy to recover the original menu of what you can do, so you can kind of cancel your move. So you can touch waypoints, and then you hit the confirm that Brian implemented, and or you can cancel it by clicking back on your guy or on one of the other elements on the screen.
Same game, all platforms.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, it runs well on touch. We showed the game at PAX on Windows 8 touch convertibles. That's how we showed it. They were sitting there and you play it that way. There was not a mouse. And it works pretty well that way. And in fact, the first few months of our development, we were running it on iPad 1. But pretty quickly, our textures got out of hand, and there was it was not happy with that. And when we were designing the way the battle worked, we went through lots of iterations about that. And for that purpose, I wrote specifically a battle grid for prototyping this, not the game. We only tested it on iPad. And we would sit around it and be like, what if you click here? Should it show you the range that's available to you from your waypoint? How do you cancel? What if you cross over your path? Like we decided all those things on iPad.
You just talked about Windows 8 tablet-wise. Are you thinking about later on down the road Windows 8 mobile or?
I don't know. Maybe. I don't know how big that market is.
2%.
Yeah.
You could have the whole one.
Yeah.
There you go.
I mean, I'd rather spend my time. I mean, I obviously spend my time on Android before I would on mobile. on Windows Mobile. Yeah, Air doesn't support Windows RT. You can run it on Intel-based Windows 8 tablets, but not RT. I don't know if RT has a future. Maybe it does. I mean, I guess the phones are RT, right? Are the small ones?
Not exactly.
Scaleform supports them, so possibly.
What about Kindle Fire? That's a huge part
Yeah,
of Android
that's-
in the United States.
When I say Android, I'm talking about whatever we sit down and determine are the top tablets.
But you can't assume processing anything like some
Well,
other tablets, right?
maybe, I don't know. I haven't played with one of the new Kindle Fire.
There's Fire TV.
I have a Fire TV. I got a Fire TV a few weeks ago when it came out, and it's pretty cool. It killed my Roku. It went to Goodwill. And Fire TV works really well. And it plays. I played a bunch of games on it, Minecraft, and No Brakes Valet, which doesn't really require a lot of processing power, but it's funny. We got a controller, so I'm actually excited about trying our game on my Fire TV. As soon as I get, I'm focusing in on iOS right now because it's more important to me. It's more revenue. It's our biggest market. But all the work I'm doing for iOS is almost directly applicable to Android. Just have to massage the build process to the APK and test the performance profile. So in theory, I could export an APK tonight. There's no reason I couldn't, and wirelessly install it on my Fire TV. But I'm trying to stay focused because I don't want to chase every butterfly that comes across my path, and I'm the only programmer.
I was wondering, so you've run into several difficulties and also come up with some very good solutions along the line for your stack. So for your next project, when you're looking at a clean slate, are you going to double down here? Do you feel like you've got this to a science, or are there other stacks you want to try?
It definitely is down to a science in a sense. I mean, we're building a sequel right now. Two partners are content developers. They're working on the sequel. The sequel is not as tech heavy for me, so I'm working mostly on ports. I'm adding new features to the sequel, but it's not going to be as much work as the ports. So we're definitely keeping this engine for our sequels. I mean, the game was originally planned as sort of a trilogy. And so we have 2 more parts. And they're big parts. A lot of people get our game confused for an episodic game, which we don't think of it as. I don't think it's accurate to think of it as an episodic game, but we have 2 more games planned. We're planning on supporting them. We have a multiplayer game, Factions, that runs on the same engine. It's the same code. Like if you run the Banner Saga with a different set of command line arguments, you will be running Factions. and connecting to our servers. And we like Factions. It doesn't generate revenue per se. I mean, there's some things you can buy in it, but it's mostly a free game. And it's small, and people play it, they like it, they play it for a few weeks or whatever, and it's like, all right, that was fun. That's kind of all it's got. So we would like to spend more time on that. So we would use the same engine for that as well. When that would happen, I have no idea. But for things like that, things that we already have going, sequels, our multiplayer game, we could use this engine for doing things like little dungeon crawls and things, using the same art style and the same compositing. But starting a wholly new project, no, I would probably want to start over at some point. Doing it this way was a gamble, and I think in a lot of ways it paid off, and in a lot of ways it didn't. Probably could have done the same game in Unity in the same amount of time, maybe. Unity is also a black box, so anytime you're dealing with a black box where you can't see what's happening and you have no control over what's happening underneath, you're at risk. So both Unity and Flash bring that risk to your development, which it ends up wasting all your time. I'm not really thinking about starting anything new right now because I got plenty on my plate for the next few years. But if I were to start something new, I would start probably a different engine, maybe using Unity, I don't know. And frankly, I don't trust Adobe. I don't trust them to communicate with the developers. I don't trust them to fix bugs in a timely manner. I don't trust them to make good decisions. You know, I feel like I've been burned by Adobe over the last few years. I've contacted them over the last 2 years, probably a dozen times directly. You know, people's emails I know, and I've gotten 0 responses. You know, on a fairly high-profile game. And like, all right, guys, you know, I can't, I can't work like this. Now, granted, this is a pretty freaking huge game. Like I said, it's like 250,000 lines of code is nothing to sneeze at, and big, giant stacks of user interfaces that are bigger than, you know, together are bigger than a lot of games by themselves. So we're putting a lot of pressure on the tools. I like doing projects like what I was saying earlier. I find it very pleasant to do things, to do sketches and make games, and just if I have an idea for something, I want to spend an afternoon coding up and see how it looks. I use you know, Adobe Air and run it on my iPad. But for a project of this scope, I feel like I kind of burst some of the rivets and walked some relief.
Thanks so much. That was awesome.
Okay, thanks.